Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. The next episode in the podcast. I did promise that they were going to be a bit more regular now, and hopefully going to be able to continue this trend. And today, joining me, we have a fellow podcaster and also a fellow author, Daniel. I'm going to really
Oh, it's
apologize
cool.
because
It's a hard one. It's Coolbaugh. A
ah.
little bit of Polish and Czechoslovakian in there to throw everybody off on a Thursday morning, so or afternoon,
uh,
depending on where you're at.
yeah. So, would you like to tell everyone? Because I don't know if anyone who's going to be watching this on my channel actually, unless you share it, I don't quite know who's going to know about you.
Oh yeah, no, no, no. I'm Dana Kuba. I've been podcasting now. I believe this next summer will be in August will be 3 years since I started. So about 2.5 years. I started the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I've really was thinking I was only going to do about 10 episodes, and they're going to be about 25 to 30 minutes a piece. And now I'm booked out for luckily, the next 2 years. I'll have at least 5 seasons for sure. Just to get through everybody at a certain point. So I've been really blessed with, a lot of people coming in, wanting to be on the show, things like that. So it's been really fun. So kind of just started as a way to provide something to the community. A lot of people 2 years ago were talking about, everybody was like trying to take, and nobody was really trying to give anything. And I just wanted to talk to people and, kind of give indie authors in particular space to come on, share their works, chat. A lot of people, they're like, oh, you should interview these really famous people. And I'm like, I could, but like people like Brandon Sanderson, I'd love to talk to them at some point, but they have all sorts of outlets that they can go on to. Um, so for me, it was really more about giving people like myself who like my first novella is coming out later this summer. I'll have two of them out by the end of the year, or three of them out by the end of the year. I'll have a Kindle novella series, dark fantasy, and a bunch of other stuff next year. So it's more about giving people like myself an opportunity to, talk and really like display their products, not just their books. I've had some directors on, artists, just different people, voice actors, stuff like that. So it's just has been a really fun way just to basically just meet people in the community and, just kind of hang out with them and, show their products and their skills to a bunch of people. So it's been cool.
One of the sort of it kind of accidentally turned into the main topic of last week's episode was essentially almost because we were doing it in a bit of a weird way. We were doing it almost from a more gaming perspective, but it was still in the
Hmm.
creative side of things. But it was
Yeah.
almost the sort of comparison of where we're at between where the sort of kind of big corporation type ones are at and in comparison to like the independents or the smaller groups. And we went on a full massive tangent about things like microtransactions and all of that. But
Mm.
it's uh it's a good question because like you said, your podcast is more orientated towards indie creators. It's like
Yeah.
so where do you see the sort of creative industry as a whole for independent creators at the moment?
Well, at the moment, which I think is really interesting. So originally I wanted to be an illustrator. I haven't really, I've drawn a few things here and there. I'd love to get back in eventually and, get like practice for the next several years and, eventually do my own covers, or something. But for me, it was really like I wanted to do a graphic novel. And so I had written a couple of books and didn't really do anything with them, was just kind of waiting to see what I wanted to do. And then the pandemic came along. And right before that, I was supposed to actually release a graphic novel that I was writing. It's kind of like a Diablo-like story. Now it's turning into a book for me, and a really cool book too. So I'm glad glad that I had to wait, but it kind of sucks because I had an amazing artist from the local area for me here in Central New York, Jonathan Myers, and him and I had talked quite a bit about it. And, then the pandemic happened and, we were looking for a cover artist and stuff and, stuff just happened. Um, and I just find it interesting. I bring it up because, the indie comic market in particular, because of Kickstarter, has really swung back up. We were thinking, it was going to dip down after the pandemic. I buy a lot of indie comics. There are a lot of just amazing artists, amazing writers and stories that you can find. And I have absolutely fallen in love with the indie market in terms of comics. I've always been like an indie comic guy. Devil's Due Publishing, when they were, first out, they were like an indie comic, an indie publisher. Valiant, now they're on the rise, both of them. And they're in the upper echelons. But before they used to be indie, and I've always loved really cool independent stories, whether or not they're video games, comics, tabletop games, it really just doesn't matter. But for me, I just thought it was interesting. I saw one that I'm still actually waiting on for Kickstarter, but it's fine. It's called Lasting Tales. But it just had such a cool concept for an indie tabletop game. I was like, yeah, this is definitely my kind of thing. And I have a couple other projects that I backed, that because of the pandemic, they're just so far behind. I know I'll get them eventually, but it's just kind of cool, because I got to hit that market when, I was trying to help people out, right after the pandemic. And I just thought their idea sounded really cool. But it really, I think, like took an upswing. I was just talking to our local comic shop owner, and he was talking about that too. He's like, hey, you should really try and give, your graphic novel another shot. He's like, a lot of indie graphic novels and indie comics are on the rise again. And for myself and my friends, around here, we got a pretty big tabletop gaming community where I'm at and here in Central New York. And we enjoy D&D. Pathfinder is kind of more a thing, it's not as mainstream. And there's a lot of games, I think like Frosthaven and some of those other ones, that just have like really cool, you know, indie ideas that, aren't exactly mainstream yet, but that might have really cool concepts, whether it's quests or, storylines or, how they, how you are performing a magic system. I liked a lot of the indie video games I played a couple years ago before like my son was born, on Steam and stuff. Had a couple that I have to try and get to work back on my computer again. Passive Ember was one that looked really cool. Played for a little bit, and then I got a new computer, so I'm trying to find a patch for that. But yeah, I think that indie is on the rise, and it's just funny because I think a lot of people, during the pandemic, they really ate up everything that was mainstream, and I just think now a lot of people, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, or even like sports games, I think a lot of people are looking to the indie community, in whatever capacity, whether it's books, publishing, even if it's like film, I think a lot of people are looking for more creative stories, and more unique experiences. And for me, I think that's what any indie community provides. So,
Yeah, it's you mentioned film at the end there, and
yep,
obviously one of the things that came out last couple of years was the new Dune Part One, and you've got Part Two coming out over here in March, well, next month, and
yep.
they, I found out that when one of my family members looks for the tickets there, it had sold out completely, almost,
Oh, wow.
and it oh no, it hadn't sold out, but so many people had bought the tickets it broke the system, like it
Oh,
broke the
geez.
site, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it it's one of those interesting things because you've got some of these old, you've got a mix of the rise of indie, but you've also got a lot of the older things coming back. I mean,
Yep, yep.
you look at animation and they're doing a whole lot of sequels for their old school stuff
Yeah, yeah,
again.
yeah.
And you've got obviously June had a remake. You've got the returns of things like Avatar, and the other one, and this is as a sort of person who's orientated around like the fantasy genre, but also the Total War series. One that's been on my
Oh, yeah, yeah.
radar for a while is that Warhammer has come back,
Yep.
and you've got Warhammer the Old World now as well. And so it's interesting that you've got a mix of these two things. You've got the rise of indie and you've got the return of the old at the same time. And it's just an interesting mix because one of the other things we talked about was like passion projects with modders and how modders are so skilled at keeping old games fresh and alive. And
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
you had things like Star Wars Empire at War and the Battle for Middle Earth ones getting full mods that are being termed as remasters because they're bringing them back
Yeah,
into the
yeah.
modern
Well, I
style.
Yeah, well, I would even look at look at Diablo 2. Diablo 2 is my favorite video game of all time. Um, my son was born, so I haven't had time to, to play the remastered or,
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it. But I mean, I think that was genius of them. And, they added a couple of things and, switched some things around. But I would much rather play that game, to the day I die than, no offense, than a lot of newer games. It was just my game, not just nostalgia, but just, all the things I love in a game. And I thought the world building was amazing, the magic system. Yeah, it was just amazing. But I think too, you had like Baldur's Gate 2, those were being remastered, and switched over for, PS4, 5 and Xbox or whatever. And I think there is a bit of nostalgia that goes into those kind of things. I cannot wait for the last Airbender. I can't remember if it's today, right? I think it's today as it drops. But I just for me as a writer, I loved seeing those kind of things go to a different medium because I think that there's a lot that gets added. There's a lot of times where they leave things out. I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of, obviously, with Avatar. But in terms of games and just things in general, it's just funny to me because you had Rebel Moon Part 1. I watched about the first 45 minutes. I'd like to finish it just to kind of see, but I was so pumped for that and I'm like, I'll get to it eventually, But that was supposed to be like Zack Snyder's big thing, like Star Wars, And I think that people want those kind of things, but you know, a lot of people like Netflix or, even like look at Halo, right? Like I watched the first episode, on Paramount. I'll watch the rest, but it really wasn't what I was expecting.
No,
And you know what I mean? And I think that those lost expectations, like people literally in the indie community, we work so fast, right? And it's like um I had something happen yesterday and like stuff was falling around me and like I had my kid in my hands and I was so quick I was able to, get him out of the way and kind of brush some of the things out of the way without either one of us getting hurt, and I just almost look at it almost like Neo from the Matrix. Is like the indie market's so quick, you know what I mean? Like
mm,
we have that ability. Like I have the ability where I'm like, oh, people didn't like, let's say they didn't like Rebel Moon. I'm like, okay, I could literally, if I really wanted to, I could write from now until the end of the summer and release something better than that. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like I could look at what people didn't like and I could write something better than that. And that's not like bragging. That's like any indie author. Like you just have the ability and games too, like you have a smaller group of people that you have to report to. And I teach
yeah,
history and it's kind of funny because you look at, we're in the UK right now, studying first industrial revolution. So it's just interesting because, the things that made industry and the factory system grow versus manualism or the cottage industry or the domestic system, now it's almost like it's reversed. Like all those things that made the big bad industries, really strong and gave them a lot of effects are now actually hindering them. And it
yeah,
allows people like myself, which I mean, you look at any indie community is a cottage industry or domestic system. Like you have a few people that can work and be far faster and have a greater effect. You have to find your audience, which is what the factory system, or mainstream does, traditional publishing, whatever games, but like you have that ability, right, to maneuver really quickly. I think it's like Neo, I've seen people like Lindsay Baroker, who she's an amazing indie author. She's written so many books, but she's so quick. Like she's like moving that fast, and then that's where she's able to take up some of that space. After even like the Star Wars when it came out, like Revenge of the Sith or Attack of the Clones, like those kind of things. She
yeah,
had space opera stuff coming out after that. I mean, like she was able to fill those gaps really quickly, and I think it's because we are small, and it's like the rebels in Star Wars, like indie, they're like, oh, we're small, we're this or that. Like that's our strength, actually. You're like a guerrilla warfare, tactical team all in one. You can get to different places. If I really want to, I could write something better than Rebel Moon, look at the reviews, look what people say. Part two will be out, and then I can fix it. I can put out one book, and then I could even see if there's something with Avatar that people don't like. I could do something similar to that. 6 months, I'd have two products that could fill some of that interest, and maybe if I hope, knocking on wood, that Avatar is better than the last one, the one that shall not be named. But you know what I mean. But like you have that ability to move so quickly and to fill those gaps. It's almost like you're like a Roman infantry force. Like you're a
Hmm.
heavy in terms of the Malazan books. Like you're able to fill in those gaps in the market. Because of your mobility. And to me, like it doesn't even matter, like I said, which indie market you're in. We have that ability, and if you can understand that as an indie creator, right? Whether you're an artist or writer, whatever you're doing, comics, games, tabletop, whatever, if you can just understand what your strengths are and, really apply to those strengths, I think that you'll be really successful. So,
I'm always stood by the argument, and I still do, that it is a whole lot easier for an indie author to keep themselves unique and preserve the identity of their own work than it is
yeah, yeah,
for,
yeah.
well, I don't want to say mainstream. I want to say like, and I don't want to say traditional either because that's not the right term either. But in comparison to like publishers or big corporations or things like that, because
Yeah.
like one of the um, one of the real interesting things to sort of look at on all of this, you mentioned it, is Halo, and like Halo is one of those things that's suffered from maybe the similar thing that Star Wars has suffered from recently, and Lord of
Oh,
the
agreed.
Rings
Yeah.
definitely, which is
Yep.
unfortunately TV shows. Um, like, don't get me wrong, a decent amount of the Star Wars TV shows are still really good, but there are some that are really not good.
Well, I
And
think you mentioned like passion too, though. I just had this talk, so I just want to mention that the other day. Like, I think it's, you get somebody who, the fact that it took like what 25 years for Wolverine to get his actual costume. That's
yeah,
all anybody really wanted from the start, particularly after the first X-Men when Hugh Jackman was our Wolverine, and it's like that'd be like if you didn't get Batman in his costume for 30 years in six
yeah,
movies.
yeah,
It's like why? You know what I mean? Like why? And you talk about passion projects, there were so many cosplayers for these horrible costumes that even no offense, the new Daredevil, like in Born Again, like his red costume. I'm like, why didn't you just give that to a cosplayer? Like bring in a couple cosplayers, they would make that costume so much better, and I was really disappointed when I saw it yesterday. And I'm not talking about the yellow and red. I'm talking about like his new red one. And I think it's the same thing with Halo and Star Wars. These people, the problem is they want to make money. Now, the thing that they don't understand about us is we have a passion for these things, right? And
mm,
for us, like we're gonna spend the money either way, but we'll spend more money when it's really good. And that's what I'm hoping. It looks like Avatar, again, knock on wood. It looks to me like you had people on the project that were really passionate about it and really wanted to do something still unique, but unique for the fans. And I think that's the difference. And no offense, a lot of Star Wars, I'll watch them. I love anything Star Wars, but a lot of that and the Halo, that was to make money. That wasn't to,
yeah, yeah.
for fans. The D&D movie, Honor Among Thieves, that was for fans. Did everybody like it? No, in terms of mainstream, but for the D&D fans, like a lot of people
Yeah.
enjoyed, quite a bit of it, even if they didn't love the entire movie. I absolutely loved it. It was definitely for me, in my generation of D&D, and
Right.
I don't know. I think it has to do with passion.
A couple of, I'd argue, a few different DC films probably fit quite well into that category where they work
Yep.
well as DC films, but in mainstream audience, they're not
Yep.
really that considered that well, which is a bit of a shame. But
Yep.
it's like Halo, some of the Star Wars ones, and Rings of Power. It's like all of those things have the potential to be really incredible and really good.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
because but the issue is they try to stick almost too much to the nostalgia, and they try to use that to make money, but also make it into their own thing.
Force
And
Awakens. Yeah.
yeah, um,
Exactly the same storyline, right? Like they literally took the exact same storyline. And I love that movie, don't get me wrong.
Force Awakens
But
completely same storyline, and then Last Jedi they go and
yeah.
throw out half
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
canon.
Yep.
But Rings of Power with turning Galadriel, this character always seen with all this grace and everything, into a sort of like warrior princess kind of character, and then Halo, like the thing that irks me about the Halo TV series is that they could have done what they did with pretty much any other established sort of Spartan type character, but because it's
Yeah,
Halo,
yeah.
they had to have the titular character, and that's almost the thing that defeated the ability for that to be happy because and I mean, it's also interesting that it comes along a similar contrast point to the release of Halo Infinite, which, whilst it had its flaws for certain, it did try very hard to go back to the old, almost iconic kind of art style and things. And that was stuff that went down really well. But then you had that, and then you had a mix, and just like trying to do the both, and and like all of this makes one thing that I am very interested to hear more about, but also quite nervous is when they're talking about the potential of a Stargate remake.
Uh, yeah, I mean, yeah, that one's hard. I feel like because you have so many other like I've been watching like a lot of the older shows for it, and I don't know. That's just like to me was like classic episodic sci-fi.
Mm.
Um, with still having particularly like SG1, having like I would say like really like season end of season two, right? Three and four, like being like more overarching storylines.
I mean,
But I don't know.
SG1 lasted for 10 years, had two films, and then it's amazing when
Yep.
you actually look at seeing how some of the stuff shifted because there were about three more different arcs that I know of that were initially meant to be like straight to DVD film.
Oh yeah, yeah, yep, yep, yep. Which I would have loved. I love the original movie. I was actually just rewatching a couple of clips from it the other day. And I just thought like you think like just fun sci-fi movie. I mean, I would say that one. Chronicles of Riddick for me. I love just watch. I'll just if it's on, I'll just watch it. Um, yeah, I don't know. For me that was really that's a hard one because I'm trying to think of something besides Star Wars or Star Trek or SG-1 like that. Those are really all in the same sphere, right? Of there's almost like too much, right? That you could go with where you're like, I would be afraid that there's too much for them to go with to try and make something good but also unique. And I think that's the problem, right? Is you have to go with I don't know. I liked oh whatever, the newest Spider-Man, right? And I felt like they did a new enough thing where you know, like I loved having Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield come in.
Mm.
But like, they did enough where it was made that storyline unique, and there were enough small nods, like well, what's his name's grandmother, right? His best friend's grandmother, who remembered Toby as having saved her, right, in the other universe. Now, that was a small nod, but that little tidbit alone, right, was amazing. And when they were going through the different like whoever told, Aunt May tells, Tom Holland, like with great power comes great responsibility. But then the other two are like, oh, it's Uncle Owen, and or Uncle Ben, sorry. And it's just interesting to me that they were doing nods, but then doing their own thing, and I just felt that movie did such a good job with just the little things. There were no real big speeches or they're like Andrew getting to save you know Zendaya was just awesome. That was just like something all fans needed. But it was just like the little things, like they were really trying with a few lines and of dialogue, and they were really trying in the story itself to nod to fans that had older Spider-Man fans, and fans of all the franchises and just Marvel in general, right? Not dividing people. And I felt like they did a great job bringing people together that way. Now, with The Force Awakens, I just feel like literally you just took the whole same movie and we're like, we're gonna do this and sell toys. And it just really didn't work. So I think if you're gonna do anything like SG1, like, it's I get, as an author, like as a writer, like you're trying to nod to fans but make something unique.
Yeah, it
And I
like
think that's where the line is sometimes, where it doesn't work. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And that's where I'm worried about Avatar. But
with the sort of writing I do, that is a well. it's a bit interesting because in terms of the historical fiction side of things, it's not too bad because you're taking from history. You're not really like history is your inspiration from that, and you're almost making it into
Yeah,
your own. But when it comes to my fantasy stuff or the other stuff I'm working on, science fiction and other genres, it's like those things are love letters to things I've grown up enjoying or been interested in. And when things like that are Star Wars, Halo, Lord of the Rings, and that, yeah, there is that line where you have to be, and that's why and it's a bit of an interesting piece of advice that I give to indie authors who look to, or indie creators who are looking to go down this route. Um, don't be afraid to actually talk to your friends for help and that. Like one of the
oh yeah,
one of the people who helped me out with some of the races and how they are, what could make them unique in terms of my fantasy world, was actually one of my Finnish mates, and it was interesting how between the two of us we were able to take these well-known fantasy races and still make them into our own thing. And I mean, I will say that I'm still working on some of them with my sci-fi series in terms of like describing the species and all of that, but there is still enough out there, and yeah, it is that there is a line there that is, and I would say probably out of all creative industries, the line that probably gets crossed the most in is probably music.
oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, I think you were talking when you were talking about like different species or just different races. I can't help but think, like Forgotten Realms. I love elves are pretty traditional in there, based off of Tolkien's. Um, and I love them, don't get me wrong. Like I have certain stories where I'll have those types of elves. We're just like typical, I don't really want to do a lot of world building. It's more about story and characters, or about what's happening to them. My own fantasy series though, I have elves and like I do a lot of things different. I have them where basically like I'm always like, well, why don't they sleep? And why do they, why are they so attuned to nature? So for me, for my own fantasy world, I had them like they're basically like green skin, so they're basically like 50% plant, 50% like elf, if you will, but they're born a certain way. So I changed that aspect. So I have like why why do they eat plants? Well, they're half plant, right? And that's what plants do. So and then why don't they sleep? Well, they're basically a plant beings, so they don't need to sleep. So I did enough to change them, right? But still paying homage to those two original
Mm,
things that really Tolkien, aligned to. I like when people do things like that, so that's why I do my own fantasy.
yeah,
That's why I'm doing my own
in
fantasy series. But
I went through a phase last year, and it was essentially an extension into the lore. I just added
mm,
and brought a load into the lore, and two of the key and there were a few different key aspects I got brought in. One was a whole lot more of animals, and it was it was also taking like the kind of things you see in fantasy, but still changing them. Like in a lot of fantasies, you see like giant birds and things like that, and I
yeah, yeah,
did
yeah.
that. I did that, but I used a species that you don't see that often,
Oh, that's
that
cool.
sort of thing. And when it comes to one of the other um, races, as well as one of the other more fantastical, like animalistic species, I took inspiration from Indonesian mythology, and
Oh, that's cool.
it was it was just one of those things of being able to take something and make it unique in that way because the nature is something I am interested in and wildlife and all of that. And in my fantasy world, I've been able to incorporate that into some pretty interesting methods and everything. And
Yeah, yeah.
even something as simple as wolves that get used a lot in fantasy. Like I've still done something to make their role a bit more unique.
Yeah. Well, that's actually sure what I did with it. Because I moved my office around recently, but there's a book I believe by Orson Scott Card, that's basically about like creating different like monsters. I'm trying to see if I can find it. Um, but yeah, he does a really good job. It's like creating different monsters or unique monsters. But yeah, it's really good. I highly recommend it to people. But the first two chapters, he makes such a great point because you mentioned just like nature. And he says basically that like nature in itself is the scariest thing you'll ever like encounter, right? And I think about that, right? There's like frogs that you can't pick up in the Amazon, right? That are like
Mm.
the size of a penny, because you'll drop dead because they're poison. Now imagine taking that frog and then making it 9 feet and then having it with spikes, right? That it can shoot out that are
Yeah.
poisonous at you. You know what I mean? And or that its tongue can go, like 30 feet, and those are the kind of things that he recommends, because like it's hard just to be like, oh, I'm going to think about this and make it scary. But he's like, no, just look at an organism in nature, maybe combine it with, maybe look at two or three, right? And then combine those things. And to me, it's just like, but that's like where, I really think, great video games like Diablo 2 came in, Morrowind, like they're just like the stupid whatever they are, the little sharks or whatever that come after you, in Morrowind when you're swimming. I mean, those things came out of nowhere, and they have basically have camouflage. They're absolutely terrifying to swim in and around. And then there's like other things, from those kind of games where I'm just like, man, they did a really really good job of just creating just like absolutely terrifying creatures, that would be, or even the fauna too, like within like Oblivion. I thought they did a good job, in the, like the other realms and stuff like that. When you go through the ash gates and stuff, into Oblivion, like those kind of things will attack you. Like that's terrifying to go by a plant, right? And it just like sucks like thorns into you and basically like sucks your blood, I mean, that's terrifying. So I think like you said, just looking to nature though, and nature is the most terrifying thing I can think of, to be quite honest. And looking at the organisms that it's created for a reason, combine a couple of those, make them bigger, give them some sentience, and all of a sudden you have a really cool, fantastical creature. But like you mentioned, mythology. I think another one is mythology. It does a great job because people have already done that for you. And
Mm.
I don't know, the mythology has some of the craziest and wildest. I'm doing that with Global One right now with my kids for their first year history. It's basically like Western and Eastern civilizations, ancient stuff. So we were looking at like Greek mythology, and then we had just talked about, well, actually, ironically, some Indian mythology. We'll be getting to African mythology pretty soon, next couple units. But yeah, like there's just, I feel like people, those kind of things are writers or people that have thought those up, right? In terms of mythology, like those are things that people find terrifying, like the Kraken, Cyclops, things like that. My kids were really interested in Cerberus, like how does the three-headed dog work or whatever, the Hydra is another one, I mean, those kind of things are terrifying. So I think, just looking at, mythology itself can give you a lot of really cool ideas for whatever you're doing, video games,
Mm.
comics, books, things like that, movies even.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a very sort of, just in general, it's just an interesting time with because one of the other guests I have lined up for, I don't exactly know when the episode's actually going to be here, but he's the head of a modding team,
Oh, that's cool.
and I know I've played the mod before, he it was just the perspective. I can't remember how the numbers lined up, but I know one year his mod got into the finals for the Mod of the Year award. They didn't win, but they got
Oh,
into the
wow.
finals. But
Yeah, yeah.
I had a little look at it after talking to him about that, and it was something like 200,000 mods got nominated one year,
Oh, wow.
and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
because that's another thing. Whilst in itself mods are pretty much based off of passion projects. They're people taking
Oh,
games and
for
putting
sure.
it into another established world.
Yeah,
Whilst
yeah.
a lot of that is the case, it's still showing the creative potential of a whole lot of people. And
Oh, for sure.
I mean, you don't even need to look at fantasy or science fiction for that either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even when you see the people who take these historical games and then put them in a different period of history, it's
Yeah, yeah,
still.
yeah.
And I just think that there is, especially, I would say in particular around people my sort of age, that there has been a resurgence in. I mean, you've always got the creators and everything, but it has been really nice to see a bit of a resurgence in book writing specifically, and just also being part of a generation that's growing up with these games, with these mods and everything, is also giving that ambition to a lot of people. So there's a lot of things we're growing up with that are inspiring us to go into the creative side of things.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, I teach at a tech school, so, we try to explain, these things to kids, where, really you're trying to teach them transferable skills. I have kids right now that I have one kid, he goes, I was like, yeah, I think I might do this as a project. I was like, and I give a lot of choice. I'm like, do you guys want to 3D print something? Do you want to do Greek versus Roman architecture? Like, what do you guys want to do? He goes, can we like create our own Greek god? I'm like, yeah, we're gonna do that. So we went through the mythology, which we were already gonna do, and yeah, they've been, because they're using ELA, they're using like writing skills. So, they're using research, which is history. There, so they have to research,
Hmm.
like I'm like, well, who are your parents? Like, is it Zeus, Hera? Like, what's going on? And a couple kids were like, I really think I'm a demigod, and I'm like, all right, cool. Percy Jackson just came out. I loved it. So I was like, sure, why not? A lot of them read the series. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, to me, that gives a lot of ability. Say one kid, he's like, I want to be the god of protection. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, he was like, I want to be like opposite of Aries. He goes, I'm gonna, in particular, like protect innocent women and children. Like, if you're talking about in the Middle East right now, Gaza Strip, he's like, bam, my Greek god is there. His symbol's a shield. And he's literally like has these shield powers, so much cooler than Captain America. No offense to anybody. And I'm like, dang, no, it's like really good. Like, I'm like, dang, that is sweet. And I mean, it was really cool, but it totally follows, it really shows, like I had one kid who goes, I want to be the god of murder and mayhem. I'm like, no, that doesn't work. Like, he goes, well, it's just like Hades, he's the bad guy. I'm like, you clearly have not understood or
Hmm.
done the research. I'm like, he gets blamed a lot. I'm like, we talked about him being the god of death, and how Shiva kind of gets a bad rap too, because no one's going to ever look at you in a good way for the god of death.
Hades, Shiva,
Um,
Anubis, all of the ones like
yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah. But it was just funny, So I'm like, no, we're gonna have to develop this idea. But a lot of them had just like really great concepts, and I don't know. In teaching, I get a lot of areas where, I've had kids be like, oh, I want to, I'm like, sure, why not? And we always talk about good teachers always talk about, like what do you really want to happen? Like that's what you want, right? You want them to come up with ideas. You want them to relate it to what you've already, what you they has already been established. You want them to be able to mod things, in real
Yeah.
life. So I don't know. And I always talk about it, I had a kid ask me for his personal project. He goes, can I mod this video game? And then explain the mods and why I did it and why I like it. I'm like, sure. So he did that. And that was his, he's like, I want to be a video game designer. And he's like, I'm just, love modding games. And he created a couple of his own simple games. I'm like, this is super cool. Because I didn't think that that could be a project or whatever. I was like, well, that's totally a project. I'm like, you're doing the same thing. I'm like, what does it matter? So I don't know. I just see so many people don't think that's creative. And I'm like, but you're literally taking something that
Yeah.
somebody else had, it's giving you a creative idea and it is a creative outlet. So we try and explain to them all the time, like I
It's
had some kids
almost
like,
a
I
it,
really,
it it's almost a more modern creative outlet.
I think that's a great way to put it, honestly. 3D printing's another one. I have a lot of kids that are like, hey, want to do this and this. So like I'm like, yeah, sure. They're like, they want to actually come up with their own STL files. They want to be able to cut and put them together. So I've had to do a lot of training myself this year and next year. I have the same three groups of kids coming through. They just go from one grade to another with the same teachers. So I'll have them next year. So my buddy and I are like taking all this training for, how to do your own STL files and stuff. But that's really cool, and some of them might want to sell those. Some of those might want to, maybe they, do go into video games. I don't know. But I
Hmm.
just think mods are really cool. I like that. I think video games are unique though, because it's one of the only areas I know where you can mod something like that and people not get PO'd. And I guess like fan fiction is the only other thing I could think of, in terms of the writing community, but
That
like you can't,
that
you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's kind of interesting when you think about it, you know what I mean?
that
But
that is
that's
something
like
I
the same kind of thing.
yeah.
But
That is something I do enjoy about being part of some different fan pages and everything. Is
oh yeah,
when you have the people there who are talking about the direction something went in and they were complaining. It's like, oh, I didn't
yep,
want it to go this way and everything. I'm just sat back
yep.
there and I never put this in the comments. I just think to myself, that's what fan fiction is for.
Dude, I'm not gonna say which one it was, but there was something that happened a while back, and for a like book series, and I was so upset. I thought that, and this is like an author that like if I said it, people would be up in arms, right? But like I just did not like the ending of this longer series. And I said to my best friend, I was like, this is what I would have done. I said I would have done blank, 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 blank. And he was like, we were on Zoom and for a book club, and he's like, oh, that would have been better. He goes, damn it, that would have been better. I'm like, I know, right? I'm like, why on earth did the author think that ending these arcs that have been so deep, that ending the book in the way that they did, I'm like, my way would have been so much better. So I said to my buddy, I was like, don't worry, I'll never do that to you. I had a book I was reading, it was one of the Eberron series, one of those branch offs from Forgotten Realms. So it was like its own thing, right? And there was an author who, oh, I don't know what that was. We had an author who I was reading with a friend, and then they're supposed to get like a second trilogy. So they must have gotten that news right when Wizards of the Coast like first dropped them and Forgotten Realms and everything. And we're only doing like the video game stuff or the board game, sorry, and video game stuff. So and like the magic cards that were coming out at that time. But like they dropped such a horrible prologue where it like the good guys had won. It was an awesome arc, and then they had this like thing that happened to the main character that turned them evil essentially. And then the book ended, the trilogy ended. And I'm like, what are you doing? And then I found out they were supposed to get another trilogy where, this whole thing would have came down or whatever and probably would have been really good, but they didn't. So for me as an author, I'm always like, ooh, I'm like, as a reader, I hated that. Like that this day is one of the worst instances of that. But like you said, like fan fiction, my friend's like, just write a different book, So
Yeah,
I'm like, well, that one you could just cut out the prologue. I pretend that didn't happen, but I think about that with my own writing. I'm like, I don't want anybody to ever feel like, ooh, that was like really wrong to do, or I love that people get ideas, but to come off of a huge series, spend so much time and energy, and then to feel gypped at the ending, I think is not good. And multiple
all
character arcs, which I think
yeah,
were really gypped. So
all of this
don't want to
talk
do that.
about unending plot points or plot points coming to a close too fast and all of that, it just makes me so nervous for Song of Ice and Fire.
I agree. I agree. And somebody made a good point. Like George has his hand in everything, So, like, what does he really need to, you can just finish whatever, But that's like, that's like Brandon Sanderson had made a comment about Patrick. I actually met them both in the same day years ago, right when In the Name of the Wind had just came out, and then Way of Kings had just come out. I think like Hero of Ages had. So I met them at like the same place at the Poison Pen. Kevin Hearn was hosting a bunch of people. Like Michael J. Sullivan was there. I actually met Pierce Brown. Totally forgot about it until recently. He was super cool. Yeah, but it was just interesting where Brandon mentions Patrick. He goes, I know Patrick's really working hard, to finish this book. And then my friend's always joking about George. He's like just out there, he's got his hand in everything, and I'm like, well, he doesn't even have to finish at this point. He's gonna, make so much money off of, all of these Game of
Mm.
Thrones series, these prequels, these. these epilogues, I'm excited for the Jon Snow one. I'm not gonna lie, he was my favorite character, so I just want to, just see what happens. I just love fantasy and sci-fi. I think anytime you expand them,
Yeah.
to a different market or medium, it helps. But yeah, I don't know. I I've waited to book club them with my buddy for so long, and I never watched the last season. So we've been waiting and waiting. I told him the other day, I said we should really just read them, and some of the time we're done in
I,
5 or 6 years,
I
maybe they'll
don't
be
think
done.
I don't think there's going to be too many people who are going to hold it against you for not watching the last season.
In my mind, it was all done. So yeah, that's one I'll probably never get back to. But I
Mm,
want it to stay as good as it was. But
yeah.
yeah. But that's
In
another thing too, right? Like again, you go in for money, and they're ahead of him for the market, and I don't know if you've ever read the I Am Number Four series or seen the movie, but that was one where they actually made the movie before the book was out. And then the books, I mean, were awesome. I wish they would actually go back and remake that either movie or TV show, because I think that's one that the books did such a greater job going in depth. And people are always wanting something like that. And I'm like, why not just I always, throw them into that book series. But I think it would make, an amazing debut on any of the live, TV shows on any of these channels. Um, but it's just so interesting to me because the movie, like, it was like, okay, I enjoyed it at the time, but then I read the books. I was like, oh my God, that movie sucked compared to, these books. But it's a good sci-fi movie. You just watch it by itself. But like, there's so much more depth in the books, particularly the first one where I felt like, they really did it dirty, in the author. But again, that's the problem with going to those mediums. So I think that, now
Yeah.
it is kind of nice though, because now we have the TV show. I was actually just complaining because Honor Among Thieves 2, they said they might scrap it for a bit, and Paramount's going to try to do their own TV series for D&D, which I'm excited about, don't get me wrong, but I also want Honor Among Thieves too. So they're gonna do the TV show first, and then it sounds like they're gonna try to do the second movie, to generate buzz and things like that. But I do think that's smart though nowadays, because you could just do an eight plug, season, 8 to 10 episode season, see how it goes, but like something like Jack Reacher, wasn't a big fan of the movies, but you got a guy like Alan, playing Jack Reacher now, and I mean it's absolutely amazing, so I do think that it ends up kind of interesting. Going back to your original question with indie, it's kind of interesting, right? Because having these TV show platforms now, I think also gives people an opportunity in the indie community to do the same thing. And I
Mm,
think you're able to expand, because if you look, right, there's a lot of different books and a lot of indie books, that not just traditional books, that have been picked up by, people that want to do television, shows or series now. So like, yeah, we're getting watered down a bit with this and that, but now they're actually, instead of just writing these things with writers, they're going to actual authors and then bringing them into the conversation about how these shows should be done. So I think that, you are going to see a huge influx of indie being pushed onto that, because again, if the traditional market's so slow, because they have a lot of different pieces, I think that it could be an easy way for Hollywood to get into the indie market, for books, comics, and games, and then to actually bring some more of those shows, to light. So I do think you're going to see a lot more of that in the next several years. So I'm calling it now.
yeah. Yeah. I think that is a really good point. That just because it is one of those things, like you have it so often where someone reads a book and then watches the film adaptation of the book and then isn't keen on the film because it missed out all of these different points. But it's like
Yeah, yeah,
a film has a time limitation, a book
yeah,
does
yeah, yeah.
not.
Yep.
And that's one of the crucial differences between the mediums. But I think, yeah, it is 100% right that you're um, obviously you had everything that Marvel did. Marvel are comic book based, and it's just you saw everything they did, and it's one of these things. TV show, film, games, and to an extent, maybe even something like music. Altogether, they have the ability to interlock and interweave with authors, and doesn't matter what medium your book is in, if it's paperback, comic, or if it's a comic book, or any of these things. or
Yeah.
even if, or even in some cases artists, because artists are a great almost midway point between the two, like an
Yeah. Yeah.
interlocking point in a lot of cases, and it's it's almost like what you're seeing start to establish itself is almost an interconnecting web between indie creators when it comes to the different mediums, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it has and it's an idea that has the potential of going a really long way. And because, like we were saying it last week, some of the sort of bigger groups and everything, like you're seeing the new Marvel stuff sort of be very hit and miss. You're seeing, well, I was going to say EA, but EA kind of just make the same game over and over again with a different title. Um, but you've got what happened with Activision with the new Call of Duties, and it's just you're seeing all of these different things happen, and then you're seeing the independent and the small ones get through, like Baldur's Gate 3, God of
Yeah.
War is
Yeah.
another one. There was a Pinocchio game that had a completely different style to it, and it's just you're seeing so much of this interlock now, and it is so great to see because you've also got it where again like some modding teams they do the mod for a while but it's almost like a test basis and then they go on to create their own game. Sometimes that works,
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
it doesn't. um like I think one that's going to be a bit of a scar for a while is the Golem game
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because that was not good. But
Yeah.
it is very interesting to see the way these things are going and how now because of the advancement of like things like yeah gaming and modding and all of that it's far easier for these things to interlock. And like one of the other interesting conversations that I had actually last week was talking about AI and all of that and how
Mm.
AI can potentially play factors in this and maybe put some of the creative stuff at risk. um it's a very yes and no thing. In some cases, you are seeing it like you already had the controversy that artists had with it, with the loopholes and everything. But
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's almost one of those things where the creative industry as a whole is something that AI would have an incredibly tough time at displacing or taking over because there are so many ways to do the creative industry which would just work around technology even now. And is why I'm more in the boat that if AI does go down that road of displacing jobs and everything, is far more likely to end up doing it to the more menial jobs like the couriers or maybe even like bin men or things like that than it is creative because creative is far more outside the box almost always and it's almost you see it anytime it tries to go in that box it doesn't really work.
Well, I think historically, right? Like, and a lot of people don't like to look at history for those facts, but
I like history
you
so
know,
I'm fine with it.
well, historically speaking, and I try to tell people, I go, you're not going to be able to put AI back in the box now. So should there be sanctions? Yeah. I was really impressed with the art at first, but I thought that I didn't realize that they were using unlicensed images. So I'm
Hmm.
like, well, you're really just doing what a person can do, you know.
You are literally taking a person's creation
Yeah,
and
literally,
yeah,
which is where I'm like, yeah, no. So I have not used it. We use it for class and stuff, for kids or whatever. But anytime, and I don't blame people for, like being an indie author is expensive. Like, I had an artist who was awesome. And then, his prices went up, but now he's not doing private commissions anymore. I think he got a new job. So, but you know, I mean, he did an amazing job for me. So the art for my own fantasy world, I got three things done by him that were really great. Well, I need more for my website. So I just use just like random, just like images, not like AI, just like random stuff.
yeah.
If I need a book here, I put a book. So there are certain things that I will be doing. I switched to WordPress for a reason, so that way we could do some pretty interesting things, later and add some extensions and things. But I think that you're not gonna be able to put it back in the box. Pandora's box has been open. Historically, you're looking at, a good percentages of jobs, no matter what the market is. So unfortunately, creatives, it's going to be the same thing, in my opinion, if you look at the historic research. So I think it's going to be a lot harder though, because you have people like myself who, and here's how the market's going to break down. And people like to argue with me about this, but this is how it's going to break down. So you're going to have three different types of markets, I think, within each indie community now, particularly, let's just say publishing, right? So if you're an indie author, you're going to have this whole slot where eventually it's going to be indie author, no AI whatsoever. Then you're going to have another slot where it's going to be indie author, AI was used in some way or fashion, or maybe it's a certain extent to help them with the writing the book or whatever, not just Grammarly, like something different. And then you're gonna have a third slot, which is gonna be all AI written books, like no human was involved whatsoever. Again, you know, I'm curious to see if they're just gonna actually write their own stuff or just take a bunch of stuff that other people have already written, and have that same problem. But eventually, whatever they do, right? I think it's gonna end up into those three categories. Now, myself, I'm not gonna read things with the AI. I'll only read things that are gonna be in that category. Now there are people that use it for different things, not trying to say anything about that. There's some people, that use it to a far greater extent. And I've heard the argument that it's like Grammarly. Um, and I'm like, I purposely put each word in a certain spot for a reason. Even like spell check or, the grammar pieces on Word, I'm like, now in my novella, and I'm like, nope, I want the person to say this thing. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty organic about it. So
things just as simple as even spell check when you're doing fantasy with sci-fi series. It's a real
yeah,
pain sometimes,
it really is, yeah. Well, like
especially
the
when
old word, you used to be able to add the words to the dictionary, and it was really easy. Now it's like a lot harder. But yeah, it's just I don't know. There's yeah, that I wasn't even thinking that. I think that's a great point. But I also had somebody like, well, you do maps, right? I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, they try to tell me that AI was the same as incarnate, and I'm like, no, it's really not. I'm like,
no,
incarnate, you draw your own map. I go, that's a creative software tool. So I said that's just not the same argument. But I think eventually you're gonna have it go into different areas. But there are gonna be some people who um are going to, like, our biggest issue right now isn't even like, I think, things being written. Somebody was like, oh, the I'm gonna put my book on the indie market, it's gonna sit there forever. You have I would like to see AI tools help us to not write books but to market.
yeah,
I
that would
You know
be
what I mean?
brilliant.
Yeah, but like, because like right now you have, let's just say my podcast group on Facebook, I have had to kick out like over 50, 60 people that claim to be book promoters. Well, they're really just scammers, right? And I've had to kick them out. So I was
Unfortunately, you
lucky
get that in
to.
most book groups.
Oh, yeah, but you know what I mean? But like, so, but it's
Yeah,
hard to promote your book, because what it is, and I think it's a different field, and some people might not agree with me. They might say, well, you're taking a book promoter's whatever, your job. And I'm like, well, I only know one book promoter, two really, who are people that actually do that. One's my editor, and we agreed upon, certain things with, he's gonna help me for 3 months with this, but like really it has to do with the editing. Like there are people that do that, but there are a few and far between, and just to get through the algorithm, right? And I'm not even saying it would be me, like just allowing them even to help you to get through the different algorithms and to use that AI to basically combat Facebook's AI, right? Or Amazon's, because really that's what the issue is, right? And some people don't understand, they're already using AI to limit who's being seen based off of how much they're paying. Like that's what their
yeah,
software
yeah.
does, right? You know what I mean? So like all you'd be doing is you'd be using your droid to fight their droid in Star Wars, right? That's literally all you'd be doing. So I would like to see AI being used, you know what I mean, in terms of those contexts. But yeah, in terms of writing books, in terms of just taking somebody else's works, and pulling them off as your own. And I think that if you are using AI to a certain extent to help you write the book, not just to do X, Y, and Z. And some people are like, well, what percentage are you talking about that? I'm like, I don't know, but like if you're not doing what I'm doing or what my friends are doing, where you're meticulously putting these different words down for a reason, like I'd kind of like to know, like beforehand. And I know some people, they don't want to do that. But I think eventually you're going to see Kindle in particular and the ebooks, I think you'll see those different genres. But eventually I guarantee you'll see some sort of, you know, conglomeration of those the
Yeah.
different types that I was talking about. I think you'll see those eventually, but
It
I think it's again,
is
it's Pandora's
yeah.
box. So
It is nice though that you can still look at something like the creative industry and take quite a bit of solace in, or solace, no, reassurance in the fact that there are specific elements of the creative industry that would be
I think
inc-
solace is a good word for it.
yeah,
I think solace is a
inc-
good word for it.
incredibly difficult for AI to sort of overpower. Like when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about things like physical artwork or even
Yeah, yeah.
dance, like something as simple as dance or stuff like that.
Don't look at the newest androids that they have because they have been doing some very advanced things like dancing. But again, they have to copy, your
Yeah,
movements. And
yeah.
I'm like sitting here the whole time, I'm like, I don't get it because I'm like, I saw iRobot, like I saw Terminator. I guess like I don't really understand what this fascination is with teaching a android how to fire a gun or how to do jujitsu like me. Like I'm like you just I'm like just why don't you teach it everything, have you ever seen the movie Surrogate with Bruce Willis?
I don't
It was
think
like a
so.
it was like probably about 10, 12 years ago, but it's where people are afraid to go outside because you're afraid you're going to die or whatever. So basically they sit inside and you have different controls and you have a surrogate. Your body goes out, and it's basically an android that you control, that you can feel through all these things, right? They eat, you can taste it, and it has all these synthesizers and stuff that go through your brain. So it's like you're really there. Well, he's like a detective, and he actually goes out into the real world, and all of them are basically like some of the people use them as weapons. Which think about it, right? If people are going around in these, iron like steel androids, like they probably would do that, So, but he eventually goes out like by himself without his surrogate. And it's an amazing movie because I'm just like thinking of all these things that could actually happen from AI, and that is actually one science fiction movie where it kind of gets really interesting with some of the things that are happening in the movie. With some of the same like topics and conversations we're having with right now. So if anybody has a second, I
Mm.
highly recommend it. Wasn't the best movie, but in terms of sci-fi, like it was good. Like it's a good Friday night thing. But it really, I think, brings up some good questions about the morality and kind of like where we're headed. But
So, sort of going back to what's sort of become the general topic of this episode,
yeah, yeah.
young indie creators, regardless of whatever sort of metric or work they're doing, metric? Yeah. It's the word choice. And would, as someone who talks to a lot of different authors and creators and all of that, do you have any sort of overall advice for the sort of younger creators that are up and coming?
Yeah, I started writing at like 14. I read my first couple Forgotten Realms books and like it was it. I found out that they did contests and things, so I was trying to write my own book, using the game modules, things like that. I just kept writing, 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 and then it just was really hard to finish stuff. So then I got to college and I got picked that back stuff, did my own stuff. And then, I let it sit. I was really busy. I would write stuff every once in a while, like a really good idea. Some of the things I'm writing now are things I came up with in that interlude, as I call it. But yeah, I mean, I encourage kids all the time. I think a lot of it just comes down to experience. I think a lot of people don't realize that Christopher Paolini, like really published Aragon, when he was a teenager. Um, and I really think that, you know, I think a lot of people I've had on recently have been like, oh yeah, I was writing it like as a teenager, or I was like, 10, 12, that kind of thing. And I think like anything you're doing creatively, like keep doing it. I think a lot of people think, oh, this is just a kid thing I'm doing, and I'm not going to come back to this, so it's not that big of a deal. And I also think a lot of people discourage. I've seen a lot of teachers and parents discourage their kids or students from doing what they're really passionate about. And I always reference Jim Carrey, the comedian. He's got a very famous quote, which I know I'll butcher, but he talks about his father, who could have been a great comedian himself, but went with the safe choice to be an accountant. And then once Jim Carrey was 12 years old, his father lost that job, and then they had to do anything they could to scrape by. And he mentions how, and it's in a graduation speech that he gives, he mentions how one of the greatest lessons he learned from his father was that you can fail at what you don't want to do, so you might as well do what you want in life. And I think that's just great advice. I always wanted to teach and I wanted to write. I knew I wanted to do that from like age 18. And now I'm doing that. I'm not teaching college anymore. Like that was the thing I wanted to do, but it's fine. But it's funny how my wife, she mentioned that recently. And I remember sitting at my great uncle's house when I found some books that he had written. I thought, oh, that's really cool. And he was a professor, history professor. And I was like,
Mm.
God, that just sounds like the best of both worlds. Um, and I just think that anytime you want, like, if you want to go create a video game, like, go create a video game. You want to go write a graphic novel, write a graphic novel. You're going to need to do a lot of things in that time, and you're going to need to learn a lot more than you think you are now,
Yeah,
and it's going
yeah.
to be a lot harder, but it'll be way more worth it. I'm halfway done with my edits for my novella. I have several other books that are going to come out between this year and next year. And that'll be really cool. 14-year-old me, I'm 36 now, so a little bit longer than I thought, but it's kind of cool because I'll have a lot more coming out than I thought. So I
Well,
think anytime you can do
my
that.
video is just okay.
The
I have
AI
no
heard us talking.
idea. Right. Well, I am still here. It's just I don't quite know what's happened there. So,
It's
I
interesting.
didn't.
I've actually never seen that before. We're being attacked.
Um. So, hang on. Let's just see if that may do it.
I say that's weird.
Yeah. Well, it will do whatever it's doing.
That's bizarre.
um.
That's kind of funny that
But
we were just talking about AI, but
yeah, after all the technical issues I had last week, I just really can't.
no, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, but I would
uh.
say, just keep doing what you're doing, and find more creative people to talk to. They're going to get you through.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
find a community is the biggest one. I found communities that kept me going, and you know, um, yeah, I think just have fun. Creating's fun. Don't let people tell you otherwise. And harder something is, sometimes the harder something is, just the harder it is, and other times the harder it is. Um, you know, like Les Brown, I always love it. He says the harder the battle, the sweeter the victory. And I cannot wait to get this first novella published. It's taken me a long time, and this last 6 months have been some of the roughest of my life, and this last 2 years, but I'm still gonna do it. And once I get to the end, it's gonna, feel that much greater. So I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I've got a bit of advice from another teacher a little while back now. Essentially them just saying it's like I can't remember what it said. It was something like do all this other stuff whilst you're young and teach when you're older and got a bit more experience. Um well, we've been going for a while and so we've covered all the bases. I don't unless you have any other notes to add on that you would like to. I
No,
do
that was good. That was a good talk.
have,
Yeah.
I do have one personal question that is actually related
Yeah, yeah.
to some of my own writing plans.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
do you have any like specific areas in history that you think have not had enough books like set in
Ooh.
them?
Oh yeah. I mean, I
And
would say
I do mean like
yeah.
story based ones. I don't mean like actual history books.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I think a lot of people forget that, only about 1 to 3% of our history's been written. I was just thinking about this yesterday because a bunch of my kids
Yeah,
just find that fascinating. And, so there are different things that have come out recently, particular studies. I wanted to be anthropologist, archaeologist originally, but I don't do well with snakes, and I wanted to have a family, and everyone I met in those two fields was like divorced. Like it was crazy. So I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. And I feel confident in my choices, but it's interesting because I still study a lot of anthropology, and they are talking about like Neanderthals and how like more and more evidence is coming out, that like when I was younger and I was like first going into college, they were talking about how they thought that the Neanderthals are pretty much extinct by the time that Neolithic man came along, and now we're finding out that they were side by side and they were actually like warring with each other, and fighting for resources, the best land and things. And I always think back to that and I'm like, we really don't know what happened at all these times. There's all these ancient structures and monuments, and people argue, are they 3,000 years old or 30,000 years old? And now there's evidence to suggest that man has been in the Americas for 30,000 years longer than we thought. And then
Mm,
there's another study recently that says maybe 42,000 years ago. So we're not really quite sure. And I just think that there's a lot there that you could really work with, before 10,000 BCE. And you could take a lot of liberty with, and nobody would really know it. But in terms of like ancient history, I recommend that. I think it's really interesting. Like I have my urban fantasy, so that's coming out. So I have my Nathaniel Wither Monster Hunter series that's coming out this summer for the prequel novellas, and then the actual first book will probably be out January next year. And I have another one. It's called Ogres and Overlords, and I have these ogres that got left behind in ancient times. I'm taking some of that same advice I gave you, and they're left over, and they're waiting for their
yeah.
overlord to come back. And I have them set in the same world as Nathaniel Wither. And they might be some of the very monsters that he is supposed to fight. And there's a lot of different things that pop up from both series, and I got a lot of cool stuff. But there was like a Aztec TikTok that came out recently I thought was really interesting, talking about maybe vampires ran it, and why that person thought that in their research and stuff. So I have a vampire hunting cult
I
from
can I
ancient
can see I
Aztec Empire.
yeah, I can see where they're getting that sort of idea from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I thought an ancient Aztec vampire hunting, cult or whatever, to fight the vampire cult. I go, okay, I'm gonna add that, and then I'm gonna add a current South American vampiress huntress, or vampire huntress. So I'm kind of like putting different Avengers in together for my urban fantasy, but there's just so many cool stuff in ancient history. And I love ancient mysteries, so I'm just taking a lot of stuff from those time periods in particular. And I got this guy, he's an immortal warrior. So I'm kind of trying to pick his time periods, like what you just asked. Like I don't want to pick something typical. I don't want him to be a Roman. I don't want him to be a Greek or Egyptian. I want him to maybe be from Asia or the Middle East,
Mm.
something like that. But yeah, I think my greatest advice is look at a time period that you really like, and then kind of go from there. There are so many in terms of like urban fantasy. I think they've done a lot of, like I said, like UK stuff recently, really of any part in history. I think that, you just look at really like the Americas in particular, I think, and ancient Mesoamerica, I think are some that, really should be written about and really haven't been. You have some sort of back in the 90s, they were 1997 or 8, they had found a sunken city off the coast of Cuba, and everybody was like all aghast, thought they found Atlantis. There's a CBS commercial, and they were gonna air the episode. I don't. There was like the like Disney used to do like a whatever Friday or Saturday night movie thing at like 7 o'clock. They're gonna air this episode, this like 2 hour premiere of them finding the sunken city off the coast of Cuba. Well, now it's 2024 and you can't even find that commercial anymore. So I always wonder what they found down there. And to me,
What?
it's just like it's interesting. I've literally um seen like interviews and stuff with fishermen that get routed away from there. And the US and Cuba are still down there and doing whatever. So to me, it's really interesting. So I take things like that. I love TikTok. My friend laughs at me all the time, but there's a guy that talks about ancient Nephilim and stuff, and he just has really cool stuff. And I'm like, that just sounds like amazing world building. So I just save them, and I go from there and kind of put together or piece together things I found that people said were interesting, and whether or not it's true, it just sounds cool to write. So I would just recommend kind of going through on what you're interested in. I'm interested in ancient Mesoamerica and the ancient Americas in particular, so I've been doing a lot of stuff and coming up with different things between there and like Indonesia. So I have some cool epic fantasy stuff that'll come out in the next couple years. So I just found different time periods I like that people weren't really right about, and just kind of went from there. So
Honestly, I've seen so many different historical articles about sunken cities all over the world that you could probably just write a
Oh, there's
book
a
on all
bunch.
of them.
Yeah,
There's
yeah. I mean, there's a bunch off the coast of Egypt, India. I mean,
Wales,
we've yeah. Heracleon was just found recently.
yeah,
Like, yeah, just in Egypt, like off the coast of Egypt, just like crazy stuff. Yeah, like and that's why I like go back to like Orson Scott Card talking about nature, right? Like I go back to history. If you go to nature for your world building, and then like your creatures, and then go to mythology for your magic, and then go to history for the rest of your world building and people, and just add some different stuff, I think
yep,
you'll get something
yep,
really cool.
yeah.
Yep.
There's almost like a tried and true formula for it.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, Robert E. Howard, thank you.
All right. Well, I think that that is probably a good place to wrap it up. I still have no idea what happened to my video.
Yes, I've literally been doing Zoom for like 3 years recording. I've never seen that, so it's like super weird, but
um,
I'll apologize to the AI later. It'll be fine.
so yes, for all those who have watched this, thank you all for listening. Daniel, thank you for joining me. Yeah, feel free to share this with anyone because honestly, views and all that will always help.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll put it on. I'll put it everywhere where my stuff is too. Just for the audience, if you're interested in anything that I talked about or in terms of my writing, you can go to www.authordanielkubal.com. I'm actually finishing the website actually up this week. And there'll be like a bunch of different coming soon stuff. And there'll be like
I'll
a
put the
list of
link in the
things that I'm working
description for
on.
them.
So cool. Sounds
Yep,
good. Thank you so much, Adam. Like I said, I'll get this wrapped up for us today and I'll send it to you. And yeah, let me know
yep,
when you want to post it and I can post it everywhere. And make sure you send me your channel link and I will share that everywhere that I can. So sounds
yep.
awesome.
Right.
Cool.
Well, thank you all for listening, and until next time, cheerio.
See you later. Have a good day, Adam.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.